Hello, my name is Robert P., and I want to talk about powerlessness. Today I'm going to use the traditional format. What was it like? What changed? What is it like now? A lot of my emphasis is going to be on step one. We admitted we were powerless over the addict, that our lives become unmanageable. There are two key words in this step: powerless and gratitude. Now, you might not see gratitude when you first read the words in this step, but if you stay with the program, you'll find it. What was it like? Everything was just fine before the addict came into my life. I had plenty of ups and downs in my journey, but there wasn't anything I couldn't fix if I set my mind to it. If addiction had not gotten in my way, I'd have continued merrily along. Fortunately, my loved one was arrested. Even though we suddenly had a crisis to deal with, I was confident about my ability to fix everything. I bailed her out. I hired a top quality lawyer. I was with her every time we went to court. I took her to 90 meetings in 90 days. I worked her program thoroughly and completely. The only problem was she wasn't working it. I was. Eventually, she was sentenced to inpatient treatment. Suddenly, my purpose in life was gone. I kept going to some of the NA and AA meetings, but this is not where I belonged. Somehow, I found Nar-Anon. As I attended Nar-Anon meetings, I listened to others share. I read about the steps, and I found a member who agreed to be my guide. He didn't like the word sponsor. He felt that implied authority. He reminded me our higher power is our authority. With that understanding, he agreed to guide me through my steps. As I listened to others share, I learned, and slowly I woke up. I realized my whole life had been lived with one simple motto: we don't talk about it. What it was didn't matter. In my family, we don't talk about what is actually happening. I stopped and I realized I'd lived my whole life on the wrong path. I've been going merrily along this path where no one talks. I missed the junction with that other path. That other path where people talk and share about life. Now I wanted to be on the path with the people who weren't afraid to talk. To do that, I had to walk backwards through parts of my life. First, I began examining all the time and effort I put into trying to change my loved one, when she wasn't interested in changing. Then as I walked back through my life, I made the connections. I came to accept that the woman I'd been married to for 18 years behaved like an addict. I learned I can say the word addict, even if to this day she does not recognize her condition. But this is not about my accusations against her. This program we love is about examining my behaviors, and I had plenty. I tried asking friends to help entertain her. I tried isolating so people would not disturb her. I stayed with jobs I hated because she did not want me to change. I left jobs I loved because she demanded I change. But those were my choices. I'd expected all those things I did would make her happy and change her life. I did not realize how powerless I was to change her. And all that time, I failed to look for what would make me happy. Before long, I realized that going back through my life was actually going forward. I went back through my life when I worked step 4. I went back through my life again when I worked step 8. I had many character defects to examine. Most became evident as I examined all I had done trying to fix what could not be fixed. I could not change my loved one's addiction. I could not change my ex-wife's desire for pain medication. I had to admit I was powerless. And to help myself, I also had to admit the errors I had made. I made those mistakes because I had not realized I was powerless. I thought about my grandmother's funeral. My uncle was not willing to leave the house because he was so sad. I offered to stay with him and do whatever I could to cheer him up. But my father insisted I go to the funeral. When we came back, we found my uncle passed out, drunk, laying on the couch. I felt I'd let him down. I blamed myself, thinking somehow I could have prevented my uncle from getting drunk and missing his mother's funeral. I did not understand my powerlessness. I had to go through marriage and engagement and a couple of years in Nar-Anon. Only then could I start looking over my teenage years. Only then could I see just how powerless I really was. As I kept going backward, I got back to my grandfather's illness. Grandfather had been rushed into the hospital. When my father heard about it, he packed us all into the car. We got to Grandma's house that night. Fortunately, Granddad was released from the hospital the next morning. Turned out he'd gotten drunk and passed out. Grandma called an ambulance because she could not revive him. The doctors found out he had serious liver damage. The doctors told him if he ever drank again, he could die. Even one beer could be fatal. I offered to stay with him for the summer. I knew he never drank when I was visiting. At 5 years old, I was going to take responsibility for this person's life. We stayed a few days and then we went back home. My father had to get back to work, and I was supposed to start school. The deciding factor, though, was that my grandfather wanted to get back to his normal life. A few days later, he drank one beer, he collapsed, and he died. I felt this was my fault. I should have skipped kindergarten and stayed with my grandfather. I believe I could have stopped this old alcoholic from ever drinking again. It was only when I went all the way forward in my life and then started rewinding it that I remembered the guilt I'd carried all these years. Guilt that had never been challenged because in my family, we don't talk about it. What changed? I changed. I changed once I began to work my Nar-Anon program. I'm grateful my addicted loved one and I experienced so much unmanageability that I finally had to stop and examine myself. I joined Nar-Anon. I listened and I learned. Then I began to talk. But old habits are hard to change. I could listen during meetings. I could share in the only safe place I knew, in the meetings. But what was I to do between meetings? Well, I should have called my sponsor, but I was not ready for that. Have you ever gotten into a strange car, like a rental car, a car you're borrowing, maybe a test drive of a car you're thinking about buying? Most cars have two pedals, gas and brake. When you get into a strange car, do you check the brake pedal before going anywhere? Before I got into Nar-Anon, I lived my life as if there wasn't any brake pedal. Once I joined, I learned that running full speed from one disaster into another was not necessary. It wasn't even a good thing to do, even though I was really good at doing it. Nar-Anon slogans are like the brake pedal in a car. The first time I step on the pedal, I do not know what a rental car is going to do. The first dozen times I used a Nar-Anon slogan to deal with a problem, I did not know how I was going to react. And I was especially worried about how my loved one was going to react. What if she didn't like me saying no? Well, the only way to find out was to try it. After all, there is no way I can drive a car for a weekend without eventually pressing on the brake pedal. The first slogan I learned to use is "No is a complete sentence." My loved one, her brother, my ex-wife, and most of my relatives do not like the word no. I seldom used it because once I said no, I was sure to get into a mind-numbing debate or a shouting match, which I always lost. Nar-Anon showed me how to defend myself. Just say no and mean no, and do not engage in the resulting insanity. Say it kindly, but with meaning. Can you give me money? No. Can you loan me some money? No. Well, why not? Because I don't want to. The next slogan I adopted is "Just for Today." My home group read the "Just for Today" reading the first night I attended. It made sense to me. I bought a copy of the blue booklet. I read that booklet cover to cover every day. I ended every night with the "Just for Today." It's a great reading. It's also a great slogan. When I feel overwhelmed, I can put the brakes on by using a slogan. At first, "Just for Today" was just a dream. I dreamed of the time when I could live one day at a time. I started by instead saying, "Just for this hour." Just for this hour, I'm going to put my cell phone on silent, not count the number of times my loved one calls me during this hour. I can do this for 1 hour. Even with "just for this hour," I still needed help, so I went to meetings. When I was in a meeting, I had a good reason to turn off my cell phone. So I found a meeting for every night of the week. I went to meetings for anything that had 12 steps. I did not understand the 12 steps, but whenever I was in a meeting, I had an excuse to turn off my cell phone. Later, I learned to just take a quiet half hour. I also learned it's okay to turn off my cell phone just because I feel like I need a break. I was changing, and then I'd revert back to my old behaviors. My loved one would ask for money, and I would think no, but say yes. I'd have plans for a meeting, but surrender to my loved one's pleas. Slowly, I learned that dinner with an intoxicated loved one is not as good for my soul as is an R-Anon meeting. I blamed myself and was quite upset with myself for saying yes inappropriately. Well, I definitely wanted to spend time with my loved one. I wanted that time to be quality time with someone clear-minded. About then, I began to blame her. Slowly, however, I learned to look at myself. I learned the meaning of progress, not perfection. I was learning a new way of life. These are new skills. I needed to learn the skills. I needed to practice the skills. I needed to build up layers of experience. This is the difference between applying the brakes in a car and flipping the switch on a light. I expect the light to turn on instantly every time. Brakes are different. Well, I certainly hope the brakes are going to hold. There have been times when I did not stop as quickly as I had wished. I was changing. I found that the slogans work. No is a complete sentence works when I use it. Just for today, or just for this hour, or a quiet half hour work when I use them. Progress, not perfection, is useful when I think things through at the end of the day. Progress, not perfection, gives me permission to forgive myself. It also gives me permission to forgive my loved one for her imperfect attempts at change. Another important lesson I needed to learn was to put first things first. If you fly in an airplane, they try to tell you about this. If something goes wrong, oxygen mask will fall from an overhead compartment. You can black out from lack of oxygen in under 30 seconds. If you spend time helping your loved one with their mask, you'll be unconscious before you can put your own mask on. Thus, the airlines tell you, put your mask on first. I will fail in my own recovery if I make it my priority to first rescue my loved one. I had a hilarious encounter with a motorist one time out in the middle of the desert in Arizona. I'd gotten into bicycling. In Arizona in that time, you didn't have to travel very far to be out of cell phone coverage, and that helped me detach. I could detach from the frantic phone calls from my loved one. I could also detach from the weekend phone calls from my employer. Sorry, I didn't have any cell phone coverage. What I would do is carefully plan a route based on various turns at various distances. Well, one day I was happily traveling along when a car pulled up and asked me to stop. The driver wanted to know how to get to the Walmart. I looked all around in every direction and I saw this beautiful desert landscape, totally devoid of all evidence of human activity, except this dirt road. So I said, I had no idea. He was absolutely furious with me. He insisted I had no idea what I was doing out here on this dirt road. So I explained all I needed to know is that 5 miles west of here, I would intersect with the state highway. And 10 miles north on the state highway, I get to the city limit sign. I knew that even the smallest of these desert towns always had a convenience store, a gas station, and cell phone coverage. That's all I needed to know. It's the same when I work the steps. First things first, I start with step 1. I know that if I work step 1, I'll get to the junction with step 2. And if I work step 2, then I'll reach step 3. Now, does step 3 have a spiritual awakening? I don't know. I can't predict the future. So work the program with hope. I looked at the map when I planned my Arizona bicycle trips. You can find the map for this program in the Nar-Anon Sesh book. You can find the map in the Nar-Anon 36 workbook. You get on this old beaten up trail that leads you through step 1, and you stay on it. And if you stay on it through all 12 steps, you'll find serenity. That motorist out in the desert wanted me to give him precise directions. Newcomers come into our program, and in their first meeting, they want answers. The answer we give them is first things first, or work the program. Putting it another way, keep coming back. I kept working the program. By the time I finished step 1, I knew how to use the brake pedal. When in doubt, I think about one of my favorite slogans. No is a complete sentence, means I no longer get into unwinnable arguments. Just for today gives me permission to take a break from the insanity whenever I need to. Progress, not perfection, allows me to forgive myself and my loved one. First things first reminds me that meetings, readings, and praying are just as vital to my life as is whatever crisis my loved one has at that moment. Work the program reminds me I do not need to have all the answers. I cannot predict the future. All I need is faith that I am on the right path and patience to keep going even through the times when I have doubts. Keep coming back is a reminder there is always more waiting for me. And by the time I finished step 1, I had gratitude in the bottom of the deepest, darkest time of my life. I found gratitude. Remember, at the beginning, I said I would talk about what it was like, what changed, what is it like now. When I started, I seldom had gratitude for anything. When I was working step 1, I began changing, and I'm still changing. By the time I got to step 3, I could already look back and see how much I had changed. As it says in the blue booklet, slowly new persons emerge. Change is taking place. You know you've been in Nar-Anon for a while when you can say, I am grateful for the crisis that addiction created in my life. If not for that crisis, I'd have been trapped in an endless cycle of insanity. I'd lived nearly my entire life with an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. When a child, I tried to be responsible for an alcoholic grandfather. When a teenager, I tried to be responsible for an alcoholic uncle. When married, I tried to manage the unmanageability of pill addiction. And when I met a nice lady and we got engaged, I found myself trying to manage the legal ramifications of street drugs. Do you know the one thing in common with every one of those situations? Me. I do not know how much insanity it takes to be an addict, but I've slowly become aware of the insanity involved in being an enabler. In step 1, I recognized my life was out of control. In steps 2 and 3, I learned to put the brakes on my unmanageability. The slogans helped me stop whatever I was doing so I could take time to think. In steps 4 through 7, I learned to use the gas pedal. I found I did not need to immediately rush from one crisis into another. I could use the slogans to stop and give me time to think. I could use the tools of self-examination to then consider whether to proceed or not. I no longer acted like a light switch. I could choose to living my life running 100 miles an hour from crisis to crisis, or I could stop. I could go slowly. I could see what was going on around me. I could make those choices because I used the slogans as my brake pedal, and I was learning to use the steps to manage how I stomped on the gas pedal. Next, I began trying to figure out the steering wheel. I remember talking with my sponsor and asking what I should do to help my loved one pass her next drug test. I knew I could use the slogans to stop my insane reactions. I knew I could think about the steps and speed up or slow down as seemed appropriate. But my sponsor told me I was still letting the addict hold the steering wheel. My sponsor helped me start making decisions about what was best for me. He encouraged me to let my loved one make her own decisions about her own life. Then one day, my loved one called and asked for help. She wanted to change her life and wanted some assistance. She was afraid of going to prison and said she would go to any lengths necessary to have a clean drug test the next time she went to court. I talked with my sponsor. This sounded like helping and not enabling. She was giving me time to think. She had a plan all worked out on her own and just wanted my support. Her plan was to stay inside her apartment for 3 days and not use any drugs. She wanted me to take time off from work to be there with her. Before Narnan, I would have done this. I was willing to drop out of kindergarten to help an alcoholic grandfather. I was willing to give up my summer to take care of an alcoholic uncle. I gave up many, many career opportunities to take care of a pill addict. Thus, it seemed logical for me to take time off from work to help my loved one. But it had already taken an awful lot of time from work for her legal stuff. And I decided not to risk losing this job. I put my hands on the steering wheel and I turned in a different direction. We arranged for her brother to stay with her. He was between projects right then and he could be there for her. He drove right over and they played card games all afternoon. She had been clean for 12 hours by that time. Her goal was to be clean for 3 full days before her next drug test. In Narnan, we do not tell our loved ones stories for them, nor do we hold them up to ridicule. I'm telling you this story because this event changed my life. After playing cards all afternoon, my loved one said she was going to sleep early that day. She went into her bedroom, changed into her street running clothes, and climbed out the window. Her brother did not know she'd vanished until the next morning. When he told me she was gone, I finally understood the meaning of powerless. I did not understand powerless when my grandfather died. I did not understand powerless through the years when my uncle was living on the streets, even though he tried to explain it to me once he became clean and sober. I did not understand powerless all through 18 years of marriage, nor had I understood powerless through my loved one's court struggles. Finally, I got it. When she looked at the choice between prison and treatment and went back out for more drugs anyway, when I realized there was nothing she could do to stop herself, that's when I finally realized there was nothing I could do to stop her. With that, I finally understood step 1. Now I had slogans I could apply to almost any situation. No is a complete sentence. Just for today. Progress, not perfection. First things first. Work the program and keep coming back. These slogans help me stop trying to accept responsibility for things I have no control over. Look for the gratitude means I can rejoice in attempts even if they fail. My loved one's failed attempt to hide her addiction helped me learn to be grateful for the changes in my life. That is all I needed at that time. Later, I'd finish working my steps. Later, I'd look again at this incident through the lens of the 12 steps. That moment in time, however, all I needed to do is find the gratitude. With that, I will close. The slogans are like the brake pedal in a car. They allow me to avoid smashing headlong into yet another disaster. I use the steps as if they're a gas pedal. When I've learned how to proceed with caution while allowing myself time to think, I'm no longer petrified and afraid of what will happen. Self-focus is like the steering wheel. I know better than to get into a car with a drunk driver who cannot even see the road. Yet I often let my addicted loved ones hold the steering wheel and control my life. I'm powerless over my addict's choices. I have the power, however, to make my own choices and do what is best for me. My love for the addicts in my life has never changed, but I no longer let them drive me from one bout of insanity to another. For that, I'm grateful. I'm grateful the unmanageability of my life brought me to Narnan. I had to accept powerlessness in order to find gratitude for what seemed like a hopeless situation. Thank you for allowing me to share. With that, I'll close with the I version of the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it is me.